All right, so here we have Phoenicians and Hebrews Notes Part 4. And today we're going to talk about Hebrew kings and contributions of the Hebrews. So, the last time you watched a notes video, it was talking about Moses. So Moses, when he was leading the Hebrews out of Egypt, he dies shortly before they reach Canaan, but they were led by Joshua. So let me go back to our map. So the Hebrews are escaping Egypt, heading through the Sinai Peninsula. Here's the Red Sea right here. And then they get to the ancient land of Canaan. Once they're in Canaan, they become farmers and shepherds. And the Canaanites that were living there for those 600 years that the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt influenced the Hebrews, and the Hebrews create their own version of certain tools and an alphabet. And you'll remember, let me get this. Oh, I thought I had it queued up. I do not. So give me 1 second while I get my folder out again to show you. I know you saw this in the other video. But here we see the Hebrew alphabet. Let me see if I can spotlight it. Oh, that didn't work. Everything's failing for me. Anyway, you can see here the Hebrew alphabet and how it changed, how it starts off. The Canaanites create it, the Phoenicians make changes to it, the Hebrews make changes to it, and you can see how then the Greeks change it, and then the Romans change it. Oh, there's what I was trying to do before. But anyway, back to this. Okay, so it doesn't rain often in Canaan, so the Hebrews would store water in basins, something they learned from Egypt. Basins are that large hole in the ground that stored the water. And the Hebrews grew things like olives, barley, wheat, and grapes. Most Hebrews slept on the upper level or the roof of their one-room houses because it was cooler. And I don't mean cooler like hip. I mean cooler like temperature-wise. Because in the desert, which Israel is in the desert, it is cool in the PM nighttime hours as opposed to the morning hours. So it was normal in ancient times to sleep on the roof outside because there's no air conditioning or anything like that. So houses for the Hebrews were made out of mud brick or stone, just like the Phoenicians. They had wooden beams to support the roof. And it leads for Hebrew society to grow. Here's what happens next. So after Joshua died, remember you learned in one of the notes videos that there were 12 Hebrew tribes? Well, the 12 tribes split up after the death of Joshua. And a judge settled disputes in these groups, but then also led troops into battle. So a judge in Hebrew society is also kind of a general. So over time, the Hebrews decide they want to be united again instead of being split apart, and they need a king to do it. And that king is named because he was the strongest farmer / warrior. So he was a farmer that becomes a soldier, and he was the best soldier. So when it's time to decide a king, the guy for the job is Saul. So Saul is the first king of the Hebrews. And after Saul, his son David becomes the new king. And what David does is he fully continues the work that Saul did. He fully reunites the 12 Hebrew tribes and defeats the Canaanites in battle. They got into a conflict, their neighbors, and he forms a new city called Jerusalem, which still stands today, on the site of a Canaanite fortress. So let's go. I'm going to zoom in on Israel. Let's get closer. There you can see the city of Jerusalem right here. So this is the city that the ancient Hebrews form. So David is the one that defeats the Canaanites and forms this new Hebrew city, Jerusalem. So after David, the next king is this guy, Solomon. So Solomon brings peace and makes the Hebrew kingdom even more powerful through trade and treaties. So just to back up a second, we have the warrior farmer, the first king, Saul. Then comes David. David defeats the Canaanites, forms Jerusalem. And then after David, we have Solomon, who is going to make peace deals and trade deals. And they build a huge temple in Jerusalem during the time of Solomon that's made out of limestone, cedar wood, and gold. And after Solomon dies, once again, the Hebrew kingdoms split apart. Part of them settled in northern Israel, and the other part is in southern Israel. And this is confusing because of what I just said, but the northern part was Israel, the southern part was called Judah. So essentially what they do is they split what is today Israel, and this part was called Israel, and this part was called Judah. And that's after the death of Solomon. Okay, so there were times the two Hebrew groups, the group in Israel and the group in Judah, fought each other, and this weakens them for others to conquer. And that's a common thing in history, is whenever you have civil war, after the Civil War is over, because you just fought a war and your whole country is weakened, you got to be careful because someone can swoop in and take over the land. And that's exactly what happens, unfortunately, to the Hebrews. They are forced out of their land by a group called the Chaldeans, and they have to move to Babylon. Now, let's back up a little bit. I know we know Babylon from Hammurabi times, but let me just back up here so you can see Babylon is like right over here. Okay, so here's what happens. The Hebrews have that conflict where it's Israel against Judah. And then there's a group in here, the Chaldeans. They're like Mesopotamia version 3.0. And we're going to learn about them in the next unit. And you might have been like 3.0. What happened to 2.0? Well, the Assyrians, who we'll also learn about in the next unit that ended up conquering Egypt for a bit, they're Mesopotamia 2.0. So what the Chaldeans do is the Chaldeans take over and they force the Hebrews. So the Chaldeans didn't like that the Hebrews were worshiping one God, and the Chaldeans tried to force their religion, their Mesopotamian religion, onto the Hebrews. And they thought, well, they built this big temple in Jerusalem, and this is where all their holy sites are. So the Chaldeans thought the way to get the Hebrews to stop practicing their religion is to remove them from their homeland. So they're forced out of their homeland and forced to move to Babylon by their conquerors, the Chaldeans. So they don't have their temple when they're in Babylon because their temple's in Jerusalem. So what happens is they start meeting in small groups on something called the Sabbath, the day of rest. So in the Jewish religion, the Sabbath is on Saturday. In Christianity, the Sabbath is on Sunday. So both those religions have a Sabbath. And when those Hebrews that are living in Babylon, forced out of their homeland, meet together, they're celebrating not only their religion and their history, and they're doing this all in secret, and the Chaldeans have no idea. After 70 years, so like 2 generations, they're allowed to return to their homeland of Israel when the Persians conquer the Chaldeans. So let me back up so we can see this. So let me zoom out even more. Come on, map. My computer just doesn't want to cooperate today. I don't know what it is. It's like, whatever, Mr. Gujic, you'll get what's on the map and you'll like it. There we go. And now it zoomed out. Oh, no, this is a little too much. Let's zoom back in. Okay, there we go. All right, so you know how I said the Chaldeans are from Mesopotamia. They take over. That's okay that it zoomed in more. They take over the lands of the Hebrews. They force the Hebrews out into Babylon to try and shut them down for their religion, from practicing their religion. The Persians are from what is today Iran. So right over here. So they come in, they take over the Chaldeans. The Hebrews are there, and the Persians are like, all right, we're in charge now. And the Hebrews are like, can we go back to our homeland? We were forced here by the Chaldeans. And the Persians are like, fine by me. We control your homeland anyway. It doesn't matter where you live. It's all the Persian Empire to us, because the Persians also conquered Israel. So they get to go back. And the leader at the time of the Persians is this guy Cyrus, and Cyrus is the one that says to the Hebrews, yeah, you can go back. So the Hebrews get to go back to Israel, but they're living under Persian rule. And you can see twice already in our study of the ancient Hebrews, they have been forced out of their land. Once, the first time was the drought, where they had to go to Egypt. The second time is when the Chaldeans took over it. And this, unfortunately, is a very common thing. There's a lot of people throughout history that have been pretty horrible to people that practice Jewish religion, and they feel like if we get them out of Israel, they can't practice their religion, so let's move them to all different places. So unfortunately, Jews have been uprooted a lot throughout history. And that's why I know I'm getting kind of a little, fast forwarding a bit, but I know some of you know this. One of the reasons why this country, Israel, was formed in the 1940s is because of what happened to Jewish people during World War II. And in case you don't know, I'm talking about the Holocaust. So in World War II, essentially what the Germans did, because Germany was trying to take over Europe, and they hated Jews, they basically executed them. They sent them to concentration camps, starved them, gassed them. It was awful. They killed 6 million Jewish people. And the world was horrified to find out what the Germans did. So after World War II, one of the things that happened is the country of Israel was formed to give Jewish people all over the world a homeland to go to and live, because throughout history they've been, they've been persecuted, they've been really not treated well, all because of their religious beliefs, which so messed up. That throughout history there are people that do that. As you know, it doesn't matter what religion people practice. Like, nobody should be treated differently. Anyway, so back to this. So, something I skipped this. Some of you might have been like, Mr. Gujic, Mr. Gujic, Mr. Gujic, you skipped a bullet point. You skipped a bullet point. You skipped a bullet point. Sorry. I'm going to explain it now. So while they were meeting in small groups in Babylon, there was a scribe named Ezra that wrote down the laws of the Hebrews into 5 books that are called the Torah, which is the holy book of Judaism. All right. So when we talk about some major contributions of the Hebrews, they are the first civilization to believe in one God. You'll remember that's called monotheism in terms of a religion. It's the type of religion that believes in one God. Their religion is Judaism. So I know I mentioned this in the other video, but like Christianity is a monotheistic, I'm using it as an adjective, religion. Islam is a religion that is monotheism. So yeah, another major contribution of the Hebrews is they are the first to believe in social justice, meaning that laws should be designed to teach people to treat one another fairly. All right, now, the second part of this, I put this right at the end. Because this is two groups, I don't want you to confuse like what the Phoenicians did and what the Hebrews did. So here's a little thing to kind of help with that. So these are all Phoenician things I'm going to talk about. So the Phoenicians traded all over the ancient world. India, around the coast of Africa, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Mesopotamia, and you know what? I'm changing this. Instead of possibly, there's enough evidence to say probably North America. They believe in many gods, which remember is called polytheism. They lived in what is today Syria and Lebanon. They had a purple dye made from that snail murex that unfortunately the Phoenicians made extinct. It wasn't extinct during the time of the Phoenicians. It's like years and years and years and years and years later, it became extinct. Their sailors were artisans, so they could make custom items as people ordered them. They made peace treaties to keep their neighbors happy and that so they wouldn't take them over. So they basically gave the kings and pharaohs free stuff. They protected their trade routes with those made up stories so that people wouldn't, go follow them. They had colonies like Carthage in North Africa, and they spread the idea of an alphabet. Remember, the Phoenicians didn't create the alphabet, but they are the ones responsible for spreading that idea around. All right. Both the Phoenicians and Hebrews lived in the ancient land of Canaan. Both influenced other civilizations, and both formed cities that still exist today. When we learned about the Phoenicians, we talked about their capital, the capital of Lebanon today, Beirut. You just learned about the Hebrews. We talked about their big city, Jerusalem. So those are cities that were formed in ancient times that still exist today. All right, in terms of the Hebrews, they made products made out of gold, copper, and ivory. They traded mainly with Mesopotamia. They believe in one God, and when you describe a religion that believes in one God, that's monotheism. They lived in what is today Israel. As we know, they were slaves in Egypt for 600 years. Then, when they go back to Canaan, there were times that they fought each other, which weakens them and lets them, fortunately, they were off their guard, and the Chaldeans come in and force them to move to Babylon. Then the Persians come in and say, you can go, Persians own your land anyway, go back to your homeland. They created the concept of social justice, and their religion still exists today. All right, so there you have it. That is a wrap on the Phoenician and Hebrew notes. All 4 parts. Done.